Okay, so let's get started with Lightroom today. What you're seeing here is my own headshots that I just haven't gotten around to editing yet, but that's not what we're going to work with today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through just from start to finish, very briefly about how Lightroom works and just some really quick tools and tips on how to get started. So Lightroom is, I'm using Lightroom Classic. So there's a few different versions of Lightroom, but what I always recommend is Lightroom Classic. It's the desktop version. It's where your files are stored locally on your computer, and it's just the most comprehensive version. There's one called, it's just called Lightroom now. It used to be called Lightroom Cloud. That one I'm sure is fine too, but it just doesn't do quite as much as the Lightroom Classic version, which is the desktop. So I'm going to be showing you Lightroom Classic today. And again, that's the one I recommend. So before we get started, I'm going to import some images, do a quick edit and show you how to export. But what I want to explain to you about Lightroom is that Lightroom is a program where it's called non-destructive editing. So as opposed to a program like Photoshop, where you're actually editing the pixels in the photo, what Lightroom does is it's just creating, it's a system of previews that you're editing, and the only way that edits are applied is when you export the photo. So it's really very difficult to mess up your original files, it's fairly user-friendly, I would say. So it's what I always recommend to any photographer. Now, there are some limitations in Lightroom. You're not going to be doing things like removing a car from the background, or taking out power lines. I mean, you could do that in Lightroom, but Photoshop is a much better program for things like that. What Lightroom is really great for is for organizing your photos and then doing color correction, which is editing for color, exposure, clarity, all of that kind of thing. And for my style, that's really the most of what I do is in Lightroom. So I'm a really big fan of perfect color and color correction. So I try to get it as perfect as possible in the camera, and then do some adjustments in Lightroom. And then the only Photoshop editing I do is the actual retouching. So like retouching skin, things like taking power lines and light switches out of the picture, things like that. But the vast majority of the editing that I do is in Lightroom. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to plug in my SD card reader because Macs don't have a reader anymore. So then what will happen is it'll pop up an import window. There it goes. And then on the left side, so let me know again, can you see everything? I'm pointing to, it says EOS Digital. Can you see where it says that? Just give me a quick yes or no. I just want to make sure that these screen shares were great. Okay, so I'm going to pick, that's my memory card from my camera that's now plugged into my computer. So I'm going to click on that, and you're going to see all the photos that I took around my house this morning just for you. So these are obviously not staged photos. They're, I didn't think a whole lot about my exposure. I did shoot them in manual, and I'll tell you, I used the same aperture and shutter speed for all of these, and the only thing I changed was the ISO, depending on how much light was in the room. So on all of them, I used my Sony A7R3, which is a mirrorless camera, and I just absolutely love it. So the photos are going to be in the .arw format, and that's a RAW file. So a little bit about RAW shooting. If you're going to be editing your photos on a consistent basis and using Lightroom on a consistent basis, I do recommend shooting in RAW. There's just a lot more data embedded into the photo, and you also have a lot more options when it comes to editing. Now, if you're not going to be using Lightroom or another similar program to edit your photos, then you're going to want to stick with JPEG. Now, when you're shooting in RAW, the file size is very large. So you see I moused over the first one, and it's 41 megabytes. So that is a huge file. So you want to make sure you kind of create a system for making sure that you don't keep all those photos on your hard drive all the time. So you'll want to kind of pick and choose which ones you want to keep, and that kind of thing. Okay, so let's look at the import window. Go ahead and look at the right side, and you'll see there's file handling, file renaming, apply during import, destination. And then down here at the bottom is import preset. I have created for myself all kinds of presets. So Something you'll see consistently throughout Lightroom is that there are a million ways to automate things that you do all the time. So I'm going to pick lifestyle import because this is what I would consider lifestyle type of photography, which is, unposed, indoors, window light, that kind of thing. So what that did is it put in settings that I always use for lifestyle photos. And it's even going to apply a develop preset that I made previously. So if you look here, these are all the ones that I have made that I use on a regular basis. So I have my, you can, for presets, you can buy presets. There's some that come with Lightroom. But the best way to use them with your own personal style is to create your own. So I have those, and then I have also all of these ones that I use for more specialty things. But in general, I just use these ones and then kind of give me a head start. So I'm going to rename all my photos here. I'm going to call it photo class import, so that it's going to rename all my photos on import. It's going to apply this preset, apply my metadata, which is my copyright and that kind of thing. And then it's also going to put it into my hard drive in the exact place where I want it to be. Okay, so I'm going to click on import. I could probably talk about the import window for another 45 minutes, but just in the interest of brevity, I'm going to just leave it at that, let you kind of explore that on your own. So then the process of importing the files is going to take a minute. So let me kind of walk you through the different modules that are available in Lightroom. So if you look toward the top, you can see I have library, develop, and print available. Are you able to see those? Just checking again. I want to make sure that you're able to see everything since I was having trouble before. Good. Okay. So there, if I right click here, you can see there's a bunch of other options and other things that Lightroom will do, but those aren't things that I use on a regular basis. So I just did that right click and then deselected the ones that I don't use very much or ever really. The only ones I generally use are library and develop. And then every once in a while I use print just to make a certain size photo export or what have you. But generally I'm just using library and develop. So let me talk about, as my photos are importing, it's going to take a few minutes here. Let me talk about what each of those modules is for and what you're going to do there. So library is the module where you're going to organize your photos. You can tag things here. You can do quick develop. These are all of my shoots on the left. So you can see for 2019, it's very easy to find a shoot by date and then by the name of my client. And then in 2020, everything went to a halt right here on March 14th. But anyway, you can see I have all of my shoots organized here. And that happens right on import. So the ones that are importing today are going to go to this folder. So these are, oops, no, they're not. That's something else. Looks like they're having a little trouble importing, so I might have to restart that process. But while we're doing that, I can look back. Let's go back to my headshot. This is a headshot I shot with my friend Marie Sales. She came into my studio and we traded photos. So in here I have all the proofs. The ones that are green are the ones that I intend to edit at some point. Yeah, so let's just work with those. The ones that I'm going to try importing these other ones again really quick. But it seems like for whatever reason, they're not importing while I have Zoom open. But let's try it. Gotta plug in my memory card reader again. Let those show up. And select my lifestyle import preset. And then I'm going to click import. Let's see what happens. Okay, they're showing up this time. Great. Okay, so I'm still in the library module. And the shortcut for that window is G. So when you're using Lightroom, you hit the G key. I always remember that for grid, because when you hit G, it puts your photos into a grid, and that puts you in the library module. So from here, there's all kinds of shortcuts on the left, like quick develop, so I can click on all the photos if I want to and change the exposure of all of them at once. So it's about a third of a stop when you click it once. You can see all the photos are updating to change the exposure. I could add a preset to all of them if I wanted to. And then up here, when I select one photo, you can see all the settings that I used. So I had a 24 to 70 lens on, so it tells me where my lens was set. The ISO I used here was 1250. F2.8 I used for all of them because that's the widest aperture on the lens that I was using, and 1/200th of a second. So 1/200th was probably fine for most of these. I did take some photos of my dog. She was kind of laying down at the moment, so hopefully that was fast enough. But typically with a pet, I would use a faster one. But I just kind of kept it consistent for all these. Shot all these probably in about 3 minutes, just for you. So these are kind of like some quick edits. This is the quick develop module. And then you can keyword your photos here. You can see all of the keywords that I use. And then all the metadata is right here. So I have it set so that it puts in my copyright. Ooh, it's on the wrong one. You can see the dimensions of the photo. You can see whether you used a flash or not, what camera, what lens, all that info is embedded into the photo itself. And then again, over here is organization. So on the top, it's actually showing me how they're organized in my hard drive. So like if I click on this one and go to show in Finder, you probably wouldn't be able to see this on Zoom, but that will show me the folder on my computer where these original files are located. Okay, so now let's let me go over collections. Collections are kind of like folders, but they're different in that they're just a way of organizing photos. Now up here, this is your actual hard drive. And if you start moving things around up here, it's going to move around the things on your hard drive. So you don't want to go into your local folder on your computer and start moving your photos around. You want to do that within Lightroom, because if you start moving them around in your Finder or whatever it's called in Windows, your Lightroom program will kind of lose touch with where your photos went, and you'll get all kinds of errors. So if you do want to move photos around, so like say these ones, I wanted to move into another folder on my hard drive, I could just drag them over here because these were taken on this date, so I might as well just to show you. And then it's starting to move all those files over on my hard drive itself. Now, collections are different because it's not going to affect where your photos are on your hard drive. And collections, these are just sort of virtual folders that are just in Lightroom. So I could go into one of these and delete it, go back to my headshot. I could delete this from this collection and it would still be in the folder up above, and it would still be on my hard drive. It just wouldn't be in this collection folder. So the way I use collections is I have sort of my workflow on here. So when I am shooting a lot, I'll have a lot of folders that are going through these various stages in my editing process. And that's how I use them to keep organized. So again, these are virtual folders. So, you can go through and color code, there's a star rating, you can do all of that stuff through here, and then it's not going to affect the original file at all. Okay, let's go back up to these. So the first thing I'm going to do with these is going to be in the library module is I'm going to look through here and I'm going to flag some to edit. So whenever I have a group of photos that I import to my computer, am I going to edit and use every single one? No, I'm not. From any given shoot, like this one I did a couple weeks ago, I took 267 photos in an hour, and I don't need all of those. But when working with kids and things, you do need to have a few extra shots in there to choose from to make sure everything's in focus. So the first step is I go through and I flag using the P key. So if you see, I flagged that one as a pick, so you can see it. The flag appeared here, and it also appeared right here on the bottom left. And then you use the U key for remove flag. So I'm going to go through kind of randomly just for the sake of being expedient and just pick out a few. There's my son Jonah doing how's everybody doing with homeschool? Oh my gosh, it's a lot, isn't it? These are my kids working on their classwork this morning. One wears a shirt, one does not. And there's my dog. So I'm going to be picking these based on which ones are the most interesting, which ones are the most sharp, and just which ones I like the best. So I'm going to pick, I liked this one of Winnie. So I'm going to pick that one. And then, yeah, I'm not too crazy about, well, I don't know. These are kind of cute. Yeah, maybe I'll do that one too. Okay, so once I went through and I picked out the ones that I want, I can, I'm I'm going to put these in drag this right on over to raw sessions. And then I'll click on that again. And then I'm going to make it so that, sorry, I'm having trouble seeing the top of my window. I'm going to make it so that I can only see the flagged photos. I can't see the top of my screen. Okay, let's see if I can get this to work. Make them smaller. I can't, I have like the Zoom window is covering it up. I can't quite see. Okay, hide video panel. There we go. Ah, okay, perfect. You can still see me, right? Mhm. Okay. So on this window, great, thank you. You see text, attribute, metadata, and none. Right now it's on none. I'm going to go over to attribute and I'm going to select, have it show me all the ones that are not flagged. I select all with a Command A, delete those, and then what I have left in my collection is the ones that I flagged. So these are the ones I'm going to concentrate on for editing. So now that I have made my selections, made my collection, I'm ready to put these into the develop module. So you hit D for develop. And I want you to notice that these already have a few things applied to them. So if I were not to apply a preset when I first imported these would all say 0. But I applied a preset that I made a long time ago that just gives me sort of a head start on editing. I leave the white balance as shot, but I increase the exposure, lower the highlights, increase the shadows, and do a few other things. I also generally do some work in color down here. But you can just see I gave myself just a little bit of a head start style-wise. So like if I hit reset, that's the original photo. And then this is it with my editing preset started. So it's not a huge difference. But you know, the truth is I don't do a whole lot of, I really like my photos to look just out of the camera, but just a little bit better. So anything that needs a little bit of a tweaking, I do, but in general, I don't do a whole lot of like, you know, I want it to look exactly how it looked in person. So that's what I'm trying to do here. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is kind of zoom in and check focus on each one. So I'm using that, you can use the space key. I'm just using and then there's a navigator over here. This one looks like it focused on the earbuds and not his eye, but it's, you know, acceptable to me. Zooming in here, that one looks a little bit soft to me, so I might not keep that one. Actually, no, it was just not loaded all the way. Actually, it is very sharp, so I'm going to keep that one. You know, I would do the same thing for all of these. Zoom in, double check. So that one is a little bit soft. This one, yeah, so if I focused on her nose on accident here. So that's why I take several frames. You know, I want to make sure I have one where the eyes are in focus. This one also was a very high ISO. This was 6400. Just using the overhead lights in my bathroom, which I do not recommend, but I did anyway. Okay, so then let's check this one, see if this one's maybe a little bit better focus. And yeah, that's good. Really good, really nice and sharp. You can see every little hair, perfect. So I'm gonna get rid of this one here. And we're just gonna work with the ones that are as focused as I want them to be. Now that may not be as important to you, but for me, it's a really, really important part of my style. I do a lot of large scale printing. So it's really important to me that everything is very, very clear and very sharp. I work very hard on my focusing technique, and I have, you know, all the settings dialed in on my camera to make sure that things are very sharp and clear. Now for you, you know, if you missed focus by a tiny bit, it might not bother you very much. If you're just going to share it on Instagram or something like that, it wouldn't really make that big of a difference. But I always just zoom way in and check focus very first thing. Okay, so the next thing and kind of the last thing I'm going to go over with you is all of these different folders in the develop module, and we're going to go over this part here as well. So when you're editing a photo, you're generally going to start from the top and go toward the bottom, and then you can process in batches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this number 1 photo, and then I'm going to apply the same edits to number 2 and number 3. And the reason for that is that they're in the same exact lighting scenario and they're pretty much the same exposure. So once I've edited this first one, I can just process all three of them using the same settings. Okay, so going up to the top, up here is your histogram that gives you a little bit of information about your color and your exposure. And then right here, you can see all the settings you used for your photo. Now, this is a really important part of using Lightroom as you're learning photography. I want you to just keep an eye on the settings that you're using and see what worked, what didn't work. If your photo is not as sharp as you would like it to be, you might ask yourself, was my aperture too wide? Was my shutter speed too slow? Things like that. And then as you really study that consistently, you'll get a better idea of what settings are going to work for you. So that's kind of a little bit about what we talked about Tuesday. Okay, so up here we have a crop tool, and then I want you to notice when I mouse over it, it shows the shortcut. So I hope you can see that. It says crop overlay, and then it has a capital R. So that means that if I press the R key, it will give me the crop tool. So this is the crop tool. This is how you crop. You can straighten it if you want to, but I generally do that last. So I'm not going to do that right now. The next one is a spot removal tool, and the shortcut for that is Q. Just a little side note on shortcuts, you can just Google search Lightroom keyboard shortcuts, and you can get a picture of a keyboard with all the shortcuts listed on there. So spot removal is for like removing tiny little things. Like, of course, this is a child, she doesn't have much to remove here, but say we wanted to remove this like tiny little imperfection there, you'd click on it and it would grab from somewhere else in the screen. So this does an okay job. It's really not the same as Photoshop. Photoshop is really the place where you want to be doing extensive retouching or any retouching really. But in Lightroom, if there's just a couple little things, then this is a good tool to use. This is a red eye correction, which I really don't see very much, so I don't use that. Then there's graduated filter, radial filter, and the brush tool. So these three all kind of do something similar. You can apply edits to a smaller area of your photo. So while everything below it is going to apply to the entire photo, these three tools, radial, graduated, and the brush tool, makes it so that you can isolate specific parts of your photo to apply edits to. So for instance, I picked the brush tool, I have it on lighten. So say I wanted to lighten up this part of her sweatshirt. I would just brush that on there, and then I can adjust that area alone by going up or down. If I wanted to, you can see there's a million different things. You can, like something I do on a regular basis is if somebody has like a spray tan that's a little orangey, you can paint over their face and kind of bring the saturation down and adjust the white balance just on that one area. So that's just an example. So all three of those will work on just specific areas of your photo. I want to encourage you as I'm going, if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And then at the end, I'll answer any questions that you have. So just go ahead and ask them as we go along, and I'll come back to those in a little bit. Now realize though, I am trying to keep this class at about 30 to 45 minutes, so I'm not going to be going into these tools in great depth, but I do want to give you a start, sort of a basic idea of what all these things do. Okay, so the next one, so I'm going to close that out right here, close, and then I get down to the regular editing windows, and those are going to edit the entire photo. So as opposed to just editing part of it, which you do with those little tools up at the top, these are going to edit the whole photo. Okay, so white balance is the very first one. I used auto white balance on my camera. I think it did a pretty good job, but I do think these look a little green. And I purposefully used kind of a messy lighting situation. I mixed, they had an overhead light on, a lamp on, and window light, which is called mixed lighting. It's not a good thing. But I'm going to show you how to kind of correct some of the problems that arise when you use mixed lighting. So I do think the white balance is not bad. Here's a little trick. If you take this dropper and find something that's really should be white and click on it, sometimes that does a really good job. Now I feel like that turned it a little bit too, or like an orangey green. So I'm going to hit Command Z and back up because I just don't like how that looks. But sometimes if you have something really neutral in the photo, you can use that And it's really designed to use with a gray card. So if you've ever used a gray card in photography, you know that it's like the perfect neutral gray. And what you can do is take a photo of something with a gray card at the beginning of your shoot, and then use that dropper to get the perfect white balance and then apply it to the rest of your photos. Okay, so right here we have temperature, blues to yellows. So, you know, an easy way to do this is to go down to where it feels too blue, go up to where it feels too yellow, and just kind of slide it until it's exactly where you want it to be. And then if you double click, it's going to bring you back to how it was shot. And then same thing here. This is green over to magenta. So same thing, go till it looks too green, then go till it looks a little bit too pink, and then find somewhere kind of right in the middle. I feel like that still looks a little green. I feel like that's a pretty good spot right there. Now, I'll be honest with you, I would spend, if I were editing a whole batch of photos for a client, I would spend a lot of time just on these two sliders, really getting it perfect on that first photo. And then I would, you know that I had a really good looking white balance for all the photos. So just a note about white balance, that's a really subjective thing. It's, you wanna, it's more important that the white balance looks good to you than it's accurate, I guess. And when you are working on your computer, the only way to know that your photo is going to look accurate on somebody else's screen is to have a calibrated monitor. That's a whole other class, but I just wanted to point that out, that you need to have, like what you're seeing on your screen, since this is a remote class, the colors may be completely different from what I'm seeing on my calibrated screen. Okay, so then going down to here, tone, exposure is going to make it lighter or darker. I generally add just a little bit. Now when I double click, it goes to 0, and yeah, that definitely feels a little too dark to me. So I'm gonna raise it by about a 0.4, or almost half of a stop. Contrast will make the lights lighter and the darks darker. Too much looks like that, not enough looks like that. Back to 0, and I'm gonna add just a tiny bit. Now in this photo, I have some highlights back here that are blown out, so I know that, but if I click on this little arrow up here, it shows me for sure. That doesn't bother me. However, I'm going to bring the highlights down just to add a little bit more detail on those blown out areas. Shadows, I'm going to leave those where they are, and then whites and blacks affect the whites and blacks. Texture is a newer slider that they've added to Lightroom kind of recently. It's not something that I use a whole lot, because I don't want to soften things too much, and I don't want them to look overly crunchy. So I don't really use that, but I do generally add a little bit of clarity. Dehaze is really helpful if you're shooting a backlit photo. Vibrance is going to increase the saturation of tones that are not skin tones, and it generally works okay. Saturation will increase the saturation of everything in the photo. So I'm going to leave that at, I'll go just a little bit, add a little something to my photo. Now tone curve is just another way to edit the tones in your photo, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. Some people prefer to do it with the tone curve sliders. I just generally do most of this stuff up here. But something that I do like to use is the medium contrast preset that just comes with Lightroom. So that adds, I think, a little bit something. Now, this is a panel that, again, I could spend a really long time talking about this one, the hue, saturation, and luminance panel. I feel like this is probably something that's overlooked by most people, but it's really where I have found my style. I just really, really get into this. So hue is going to change the color by channel. So it changes the reds to more pink over here, more orange over here. I generally use the orange and yellow sliders to adjust skin tones. So I don't use hue as much, but I definitely use saturation. So notice when I reduce the yellow all the way down, it takes away that color cast from the light in the background, but that's too much because his skin tone doesn't look quite right now. But I would reduce the yellows a little bit, actually kind of a lot. And I'm not going to mess with the oranges because that will get his skin tone way off. But I do like to reduce the yellows. I just pretty much always reduce the yellows because I just like that. And then luminance is going to make any specific color channel lighter or darker. Let's try aqua. Now I was going to try to do his pants. Yeah, so you notice his pajama pants, which we're wearing a lot of around here lately. That takes that blue channel and makes it lighter and darker. So again, double click back to 0. Split toning is more of an artistic technique that I'm not going to go over today, but you're welcome to try it out. Now these two, sharpening and luminance, are super important. Now let's go back over to that one where I shot at a very high ISO. So if I reduce the noise reduction all the way, you can see it has sort of a grainy quality. So look in the kind of the background of the photo and kind of spot right here on her nose. See how it looks kind of grainy? That's because I used such a high ISO. But when I apply noise reduction, it smooths it right out. So that's why I was saying before, experiment with higher ISOs in your photography, because a lot of it, is not even going to be that apparent to begin with. This photo, I used a very high ISO, and then I used the noise reduction slider to reduce all the noise. So when you zoom back in, you can see this is the before, very grainy looking, and then this is the after. And then the other tool in this little module is sharpening. This is with no sharpening. Any photo that you're shooting in RAW is going to be a little bit softer than it needs to be. So I usually add somewhere around, anywhere between 30 to 100 sharpening. I honestly don't know what the rules are for that. That's just what works for me. Okay, and then lens correction, you're going to want to enable the profile clip corrections and let your computer sort of adjust for the lens that you use. So what mine did is it sort of removed a little bit of a vignetting that came naturally, and then it adjusted for any distortion. Let me find one that's a wider angle. This one, okay, so this one is a wider angle, so you can see like when I uncheck that, it and recheck it, it sort of corrects for some of the distortion that comes with shooting with a wider angle lens. Okay, down at the bottom, Transform is a really good tool when you're shooting architecture. I recommend that you try these things. It's not going to really do a whole lot for me in this photo, so I'm going to pass by. And then the last thing is post-crop vignetting. I do like to add a little bit of a vignette to any sort of a lifestyle image or a portrait. Anything that does not have a white background. I like to add a little bit of a vignette. I just think it looks nice. But I wait until I get these, until I finish retouching these in Photoshop to do that. So I'm going to take that off. Okay, so this is the one I did the most editing to. I'm going to add, increase the shadows just a little bit until it's right where I want it. And the highlights down, her skin looks a little overexposed to me. Okay, so, I generally would spend a good 5 to 10 minutes working on this, but let's say it's done. Then I can, down here, hit Shift and select all the photos that are in the same scenario. You can see that the #1 photo is a little bit more highlighted than the rest. That's because that's my main selection. And then I hit Sync Settings, select the ones that I want to sync, and then I synchronize, and it applies the same edits, everything from white balance to exposure, what have you, to all the photos. So now, there are things that are bothering me. This is yellow, but I'm just pointing out that I don't like them, but I'm not going to take the time right now to fix those things. This one, let me do just a quick edit on this one. So this one was shot with overhead hallway lighting. Ooh. So I'm going to try to see if I can make her for white. So I clicked on it. That made it a lot better, I think. Because my dog's fur is pretty pure white. It's not very yellow. But I am going to add back a little bit of warmth here, just a tiny bit. Now the rest of it looks pretty neutral. Okay, and then the same thing, you go through and do all the editing that you want all the way down, and then that photo is done. Okay, so the last step in editing in Lightroom is to export. So remember, when I'm quote unquote editing these photos, I'm actually just editing a preview of the photo in my Lightroom catalog. So if you were to look at the original file of these on my computer, they would still look just like this as they came out of my computer. So that one actually had a pretty big transformation. The original photo as shot is very yellow. It's a little too dark. I'm using this terrible lighting, but with some editing, I feel like it's much improved. So the way I'm going to apply those edits to this photo is I'm going to go to File, Export. Can you see the export window, or do I need to share it from the export window? Let me know if you can see the export window. Yes, great. Okay, so on the left, you can see all the user presets. These are just ones that I've made over time. I'm like a Lightroom power user, and I do a lot. I use it to keep organized, and I make presets all the time for everything. So I make presets for editing, for importing, for exporting. I spend a lot of time making these presets. And the way you make one is down here on the left where it says Add. So once you kind of make all of these shortcuts, you can save that and hit add. Okay, so say I want to print a full resolution photo and put it in my Dropbox. This is one that I made. It puts it right into a specific folder in my Dropbox. It renames that folder for me. You can rename the photos if you want to. There's a lot of options here. You can tell it what format to keep the photo in. I, pretty much always export them as a JPEG. That way that it creates another copy of my photo that's a smaller file. And then sometimes I will re-import those into Lightroom later and then delete the raw files. You can resize from here if you want to. There's a lot of options for that here. I usually add a little bit of sharpening depending on what purpose. You can add a watermark, and there's several other things that you could do here. But I just want to show you that the only way to apply your edits is to export a new version of this photo. Let me pick one. Okay, here's one I made. It's a quick JPEG to my desktop. It's just going to export, sort of a medium resolution file to my desktop. I use this one a lot actually for if I just need a photo really quick for something, and then I hit export, and then now I will have a copy of that photo as a medium resolution JPEG on my desktop for posting online, sharing with people, printing a small, that kind of thing. Okay, so that's about everything I wanted to cover in Lightroom today. Looking back, it looks like I lost, if you wrote any questions before, I have lost them since I lost my connection. So go ahead and just I'll give you a couple minutes. If you have any questions or anything else you want me to cover about Lightroom right now, go ahead and put them in the chat. But really today, I just wanted to give you a basic overview. If I were doing a one-on-one Lightroom class, we would spend a couple hours going over all of these things, how to make a preset, how to set up your catalog, all of that stuff. But this is just meant to give you a quick start. Now, my understanding is that Adobe right now is offering some deals, just to be helpful in this crazy time we're in. So go ahead and sign up for the trial, and then if you try to cancel at the end, they may give you an offer like a free 2 months or something like that. I know in the photography community, a lot of people are getting a lot of free time in Lightroom. Okay, well, I want to thank you again so much for coming to my class. I really have enjoyed doing this. Like I don't know if you saw my email, but I lost the recording from Tuesday, so I'm going to be re-recording that class and posting it for any of you who didn't make it. And again, I just want to ask you for one favor, and that's to go Google search Missy Timko Photography and see if you can leave a review. I would just really, really appreciate it. And thank you all again so much for coming. So we're going to end here. Bye-bye.